I still remember the look in my mother's eyes when she told me to be independent, framing it as a noble lesson rather than a life sentence. 9 years later, I walked into my sister's wedding and heard that exact tone echo down a posh hallway, but this time, I was not the one losing composure. My sister's fiancé looked at me like a ghost, went pale, and the moment he spoke, I knew my family had just dropped a secret they had buried for nearly a decade. My name is Everly Hayes, and for the last 9 years, I have carefully constructed a life where my last name is the only thing I share with the people standing 20 feet away from me. I walked into the lobby of the Golden Magnolia Hotel in Savannah, Georgia, with the singular goal of being invisible. The air inside was conditioned to a crisp 68 degrees, a sharp contrast to the humid, suffocating heat pressing against the glass doors behind us. This was a place of old money and quiet judgments, where the chandeliers were made of real crystal and the silence was heavy with unsaid things. I adjusted the cuffs of my blazer, feeling the cool silk lining against my wrists, beside me. Sloane squeezed my hand. Her grip was firm, grounding. She looked impeccable in a navy jumpsuit that cost more than the car I drove when I first left home, her posture radiating the kind of effortless confidence that comes from knowing you belong in any room you choose to enter. "Just the ceremony," Sloane whispered, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "We make an appearance, we smile at the right people, we drink 1 glass of champagne, and we leave." "1 glass," I repeated, treating it like a contract. I was not supposed to be nervous. I was 27 years old. I had a career, a mortgage, and a partner who loved me for exactly who I was, not who I could be molded into. But as we moved past the concierge desk toward the grand ballroom, the old reflex kicked in. It was a physical sensation, a tightening in the chest that felt like my lungs were slowly turning to stone. It was the body remembering what the mind had tried to forget. We were here for my sister's wedding. It was a sentence that still felt foreign on my tongue. The invitation had arrived 3 months ago, addressed to me and guest, a generic courtesy that felt less like an olive branch and more like a dare. I had almost thrown it away. It was Sloane who suggested we go, not because she wanted to see them, but because she knew that staying away gave them power. Ghosting them confirmed their narrative that I was the bitter, broken runaway. Showing up, successful, calm, and happy, was the only way to rewrite the story. But as we turned the corner into the long, carpeted corridor leading to the pre-reception area, I realized that some stories are written in ink that does not fade. The corridor was lined with guests. I recognized faces from my childhood, distant aunts who smelled of lavender and judgment, neighbors who used to peer through their blinds, business associates of my father who looked at net worth before they looked at eyes. They were chatting, holding flutes of sparkling water and wine, a sea of pastel dresses and dark suits, and then I saw her. My mother was standing near the entrance to the ballroom, holding court. She wore a floor-length gown in a shade of champagne that was just pale enough to be elegant, but not white enough to insult the bride. She was laughing at something a woman in a teal dress had said, her head thrown back in that practiced, photogenic way I remembered from 1,000 family dinners. She looked exactly the same as the day she told me I was on my own. I tried to steer Sloane toward the far wall, hoping to slip into the crowd unnoticed, but the universe has a cruel sense of timing. The chatter in our immediate vicinity lulled for just a second, creating a pocket of silence right as we passed. My mother's eyes snapped toward us. It was not a casual glance. It was a predator locking onto movement. The smile did not leave her face, but the warmth evaporated from her eyes instantly. She did not lower her voice. If anything, she pitched it slightly higher, ensuring it would carry over the soft jazz playing in the background. "Why is the missing piece here?" The sentence hung in the air, ambiguous enough to be confused for confusion, but sharp enough to draw blood. Heads turned. The conversation in the hallway stuttered and died. I felt Sloane stiffen beside me, but I kept my face neutral. "Hello, Mother?" I said. My voice was steady, surprising even me. We are just heading in to find our seats, before my mother could respond. The double doors of the bridal suite swung open. My sister stepped out. If my mother was the architect of my exclusion, my sister had always been the willing foreman. She looked breathtaking. I had to admit that. Her dress was a cloud of imported lace and silk, fitted to perfection, with a train that seemed to go on for miles. She was the picture of the perfect Southern bride, innocent, radiant, and the center of the universe. But the moment she saw me, the mask slipped. It was barely a flicker, a micro-expression of pure annoyance, before she rearranged her features into a look of tragic victimhood. "She wasn't invited," my sister said. Her voice was trembling, a performance worthy of an award. She looked at the guests nearest to her, her eyes wide and pleading. "I didn't send an invitation. She is only here to ruin it, just like she ruins everything else." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. I felt the weight of 50 pairs of eyes landing on me, dissecting my outfit, my hair, my presence. They were not seeing Everly, the successful woman. They were seeing the rebellious daughter, the black sheep, the one who had clearly crashed her golden sister's big day. "I have the invitation in my bag," Sloane said, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a knife. She was reaching for her clutch, ready to produce the evidence, but I touched her arm to stop her. It didn't matter. Facts did not matter in this family. Only volume mattered. "We don't want to cause a scene," I said, keeping my eyes on my sister. "If my presence is that distressing, we will leave." I turned, gesturing for Sloane to follow. I had done what I came to do. I had shown up. I was not going to stand here and be ammunition for their drama. But as I took the first step away, my mother moved. She was faster than she looked. She stepped into my path, her hand darting out to grab my forearm. It looked like a maternal gesture, a touch of concern, but her fingers dug into my skin with bruising force. She wasn't holding me to keep me close. She was holding me to keep me pinned. "You don't get to just walk away and make us look like the villains," she hissed under her breath. Her face inches from mine, smiling tight for the audience, then, louder, for the benefit of the room. "Everly, please, why must you always be so dramatic? Can't you just be happy for your sister for one day?" I looked down at her hand on my arm. "Let go," I said softly. "Security!" my sister called out. The word cracked like a whip. 2 men in dark suits who had been standing near the elevators straightened up and began moving toward us. My sister was pointing a manicured finger at me, tears now glistening in her eyes, tears that I knew she could summon on command. "She is trespassing!" my sister cried out, her voice pitching up into hysteria. "She is trying to stress me out before the ceremony. Get her out of here!" The humiliation washed over me, hot and prickly. This was their game. They created the chaos, then punished me for reacting to it. By calling security, they were delegating the violence, turning me into a physical threat that needed to be neutralized. The guests were stepping back, creating a circle around us, watching with that mixture of horror and fascination that people reserve for car accidents. Sloane stepped between me and the approaching guards. "Touch her, and you will hear from our lawyer within the hour," she stated. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The tone of her voice was enough to make the lead guard hesitate. "What is going on here?" The voice came from behind the guards. It was deep, resonant, and calm. The voice of a man who has never had to shout to be heard because he has always been listened to. The crowd parted, and the groom stepped through. I had never met him. I had only seen pictures on social media, pixelated glimpses of a life that looked perfect from the outside. In person, he was even more impressive. Tall, with the kind of bone structure that suggested generations of good nutrition and better breeding, he was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He looked like the kind of man who floated above drama, whose life was a series of smooth transitions from elite prep schools to Ivy League universities to boardrooms. He looked at my sister, who was still dabbing at her dry eyes. He looked at my mother, who still had her claw-like grip on my arm. He looked at the security guards, who were looking at him for instruction, and then he looked at me. I braced myself for the dismissal. I expected him to be the dutiful soldier, to defend his bride, to sneer at the unwanted guest and order me removed. I lifted my chin, refusing to look away, refusing to let him see me flinch, but the sneer never came. He stopped walking. He stood there, frozen, about 5 feet away from me, his face, which had been composed and politely concerned a second ago, went completely slack. The color drained from his skin so fast it was frightening. He stared at me. He didn't just look. He stared with a terrifying intensity. His eyes searching my face, scanning my features as if he were trying to translate a language he hadn't heard in years. He looked from me to my mother, then to my father, who had just emerged from the bar, and then back to me. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head. It was the look of a man who had been given a puzzle box 9 years ago and had just found the final piece lying on the floor. "Baby," my sister whimpered, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. She stepped toward him, reaching for his arm. "Don't listen to her. She's crazy. She's just a jealous, unstable person," my mother interrupted, tightening her grip on me again. "She came here to extort us. Probably, Mason, tell security to handle this." Mason didn't blink. He didn't look at my sister. He didn't look at my mother. His eyes were locked on mine, wide and haunted. "Mason," my sister said, her voice sharp now, demanding. "Did you hear me? She is ruining our wedding." Mason took a breath. It was a shaky, shallow thing. He raised a hand, palm out, silencing my sister without even turning to face her. "Stop," he said. The word was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. My sister froze. My mother's smile faltered. Mason took one step closer to me. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. He looked like he was seeing a car crash. He looked like he was seeing the end of his world. "You," he started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat and tried again. "You are Everly." "Yes," I said, confused by the recognition in his eyes. "I'm Everly." He turned slowly to face my parents. The look on his face was no longer confusion. It was horror, pure, unadulterated horror. "Stop," he said again, louder this time, addressing the security guards who were still hovering. Then he turned to the room, to the 50 guests watching, to my sister who was now pale, to my parents who were starting to look nervous. "Stop everything," Mason said. He pointed at me, his hand trembling slightly. "That is Everly Hayes." He said my name like it was a key. He said it like it was the answer to a question that had been keeping him awake at night. The silence that followed was total. It felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the corridor. People stopped chewing. A waiter stopped pouring wine. My mother released my arm as if I had suddenly turned red hot. I stood there in the center of the posh hallway, my wife beside me, my family surrounding me, and the man who was supposed to marry my sister looking at me like I was the only person in the room who mattered. And in that silence, I realized that whatever game my family thought they were playing, the rules had just violently changed. To understand why the silence in that hotel corridor felt heavy enough to crush a ribcage, you have to understand the noise of my house 9 years ago. It was not a noise of screaming or throwing plates. The Hayes family did not scream. We had cleaners for the messes and closed doors for the anger. The noise I remember is the sound of a pen scratching against a checkbook, a sound that I learned was the loudest language my parents spoke. I was 18 years old. It was a Tuesday in mid-April, the kind of spring day that usually signals new beginnings. I had just received an acceptance letter from the university I had spent 4 years working toward. It was not just a school, it was my exit strategy. I had the grades. I had the extracurriculars. I had a partial scholarship that covered 60% of the tuition. I sat at the mahogany kitchen island, the acceptance letter smoothed out in front of me, and I presented my business plan to my father. I did not ask for a handout. I did not ask for a car or a credit card or a condo. I asked for the gap funding. It was a specific amount, roughly $5,000 a semester, which I calculated I could pay back within 5 years of graduating. I had a spreadsheet. I had a projection. My father did not even look at the spreadsheet. He looked at me over the rim of his coffee mug, his expression mild, almost bored. "Everly," he said, using that tone he reserved for explaining economics to people he considered intellectually inferior. "Money is not the issue here. Character is the issue. If I write this check, I am robbing you of the struggle. You need to learn the value of $1. You need to be independent." He leaned back, satisfied with his own wisdom. "We are doing this for you. Don't rely on family. Build your own foundation." It sounded noble. It sounded like the tough love of a self-made man. Even though my father had inherited his first business from my grandfather, I nodded. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I told myself he was right. I told myself that this was how resilient women were made. 3 days later, I came home early from school. My mother was on the phone in the living room, her voice bright and animated. She did not hear me walk in. "Yes," she was saying. "We want the platinum housing package for her, the one with the single room and the meal delivery service, and put down the deposit for the sorority rush week fees as well. We don't want her to worry about anything but her social calendar." She was talking about my sister, who had a C average and had barely scraped into a safety school 2 hours away. My sister, who had never worked a day in her life. I stood in the hallway, my backpack heavy on my shoulders, and listened as my mother spent more in a 10-minute phone call than I had asked for in 4 years of education. She wasn't just paying for tuition, she was paying for a lifestyle. She was buying my sister the ease that my father had just told me would ruin my character. I did not storm into the room. I did not scream. I walked up the stairs to my room, closed the door, and sat on the floor. That was the moment I realized the truth. This was not about independence. This was not about money. This was about punishment. I was the child who asked questions. I was the child who didn't fit the mold. My sister was the mirror they wanted to look into. I was the crack in the glass. If I confronted them, I knew exactly how it would play out. They would call me ungrateful. They would say I was counting pennies. They would twist the narrative until I was the greedy daughter demanding her share. And they were the weary parents just trying to be fair. In the Hayes house, you could never win an argument with logic because the game was played with emotions, and the rules changed every time you rolled the dice. So, I chose silence. The next week, I got a job. 2 jobs, actually. I worked the overnight restocking shift at a supermarket 3 towns over, so none of my classmates would see me, from 10 at night until 4 in the morning. I moved boxes of cereal and canned soup, my hands drying out from the cardboard, my feet throbbing in cheap sneakers. The store was a liminal space, bathed in humming fluorescent light, filled with people who were too tired to make eye contact. I learned the rhythm of the night shift, the beep of the scanner, the rattle of the pallet jack, the silence of a world asleep. My second job was cleaning a corporate office complex from 5 in the morning until 8. I vacuumed executive carpets and wiped down glass conference tables that cost more than my entire year's earnings. It was invisible work. I was a ghost in a uniform, erasing the traces of the wealthy before they arrived to make their deals. I slept in 4-hour bursts. I ate food that was close to expiring because it was discounted. And I started looking for an apartment because I knew I could not stay in that house a moment longer than necessary. Finding a landlord who would rent to an 18-year-old with no credit history and a minimum wage income was nearly impossible. I was rejected 7 times. The 8th time, I got lucky. But it came with a strange caveat. I had reached out to a distant cousin of my father, a man named Caleb Mercer. He was the black sheep of the previous generation, a man the family rarely mentioned and never invited to holidays. I knew he owned a few rundown properties on the edge of the city. I met him at a diner, bringing my pay stubs and my savings account balance. Caleb was a man who looked like he had been dried out by the sun. He had leathery skin and sharp, intelligent eyes that watched me with a mixture of pity and curiosity. He looked at my papers. He looked at the circles under my eyes. "Your dad isn't helping you?" he asked. He wants me to be independent, I said, reciting the line like a script. Caleb laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a dry, rasping sound. Independent. That is rich coming from him. He slid a lease agreement across the sticky table. It was for a studio apartment above a garage. The rent was low, almost suspiciously so. Sign it, he said. I won't run a credit check. But Everly, you need to listen to me. I looked up, pen hovering over the paper. You are getting out, he said, leaning in. That is good. Stay out. In that house. In that family. There are things hidden deeper than money. They don't just cut people off financially. They erase them. Watch your back. I didn't understand what he meant at the time. I thought he was just another bitter relative, but his words stuck to me like a burr. Things hidden deeper than money. That night, I started the folder. It began as a way to preserve my sanity. Gaslighting is a subtle poison. It makes you doubt your own memory. My mother would say something cruel in the morning and deny it by dinner. My father would make a promise and then claim I had imagined it. I needed an anchor. I needed to know that I wasn't crazy. I started saving the voicemails. There was one from a Tuesday afternoon when I missed a family dinner because I was working. My mother's voice was sweet at first. Then it dropped into a venomous whisper. You are selfish, Everly. You think working at a grocery store makes you a martyr? It makes you an embarrassment. Don't bother coming home tonight. There were text messages from my sister, mocking my uniform, sending me photos of her new designer bags with captions like, Oops, forgot you can't afford this. There were emails from my father, outlining the rent he expected me to pay if I continued living in his house past graduation, a rate that was higher than the market value. I saved them all. I backed them up to a cloud drive. I burned them onto a USB stick. I wasn't planning a lawsuit. I wasn't planning revenge. I just wanted proof that I existed. I wanted to be able to look at a timestamp and say, this happened. They did this. I am not the problem. The day I left, the house was empty. My parents were at a gala. My sister was at a pre-college retreat. I did not hire movers. I did not make a scene. I packed everything I owned into one large suitcase and 2 cardboard boxes. My room, stripped of my presence, looked like a guest room in a hotel. Sterile, impersonal, ready for the next occupant. I stood in the doorway for a long time. I looked at the bed where I had cried myself to sleep. I looked at the desk where I had studied for the grades they never celebrated. I waited for the sadness to hit me. I waited for the nostalgia, but nothing came. There was no grief. There was only a profound, exhausting relief. It felt like putting down a heavy weight I had been carrying since I was a child. I left my house key on the kitchen counter. Next to it, I left a note. It was not a long or emotional letter. It was 3 words. I am independent. I walked out the front door and closed it behind me. The click of the latch was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I dragged my suitcase down the long, paved driveway. It was raining lightly, a gray drizzle that slicked my hair to my forehead. I didn't call a cab. I walked to the bus stop a mile away. I sat on the wet bench, shivering, counting the cash in my wallet. I had $200 to my name. I had a tuition bill due in 3 months that was more than I made in a year. I had no health insurance. I had no safety net. But as the bus pulled up, splashing water onto the curb, I made a vow. It wasn't a wish. It was a contract with myself. I will never ask them for anything again. I will not ask for money. I will not ask for approval. And I will certainly not ask for love from people who charge for it. The next 9 years were a blur of exhaustion. I learned to live on the margins. I learned that you can sleep on a library floor if you use a backpack as a pillow. I learned that ramen noodles can be a meal for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I learned how to fill out FAFSA forms until my eyes blurred. I hunted for scholarships like they were treasure maps. I found small, obscure grants. $500 for an essay on ethics, $200 for a local community service award. I took them all. I took out loans. But I was careful. I read the fine print. I understood interest rates better than I understood my own emotions. I worked through every semester. I missed parties. I missed spring breaks. While my peers were posting photos of beach trips, I was working double shifts at a diner, smelling like grease and old coffee, putting every tip directly into a savings jar. I graduated with honors. My parents were not there. I didn't invite them. I looked out at the sea of families, at the fathers holding flowers and the mothers crying happy tears. And for a second, it hurt. It felt like a phantom limb, an ache for a part of me that had been severed. But then I looked at my degree. I held the paper in my hands. It was heavy. It was real. And my name was the only one on it. I built my life brick by brick. I entered the corporate world with the hunger of a wolf. I worked harder than the people who had connections. I arrived earlier. I stayed later. I met Sloane 3 years after graduation, in a coffee shop where I was frantically typing a report. She was the first person who looked at my intensity and didn't tell me to relax. She told me to focus. By the time I was 27, I was a senior analyst. I'd paid off my student loans. I had a credit score of 800. I had a home that was mine, filled with furniture I had bought, food I had cooked, and peace I had earned. I thought I had outrun them. I thought the folder of evidence on my hard drive was just a relic of a past life, a museum of bad memories that I would never have to visit again. I was wrong. Standing in that hotel hallway, watching Mason realize that the narrative he had been sold was a lie. I knew that the past wasn't dead. It was just waiting for the check to clear. And as I looked at my mother's face, the face of a woman who had tried to starve me into submission, I realized that I wasn't just the girl who left. I was the bill collector, and I had come to collect in full. The Golden Magnolia Hotel did not just smell of expensive floral arrangements. It smelled of old money and the specific, desperate anxiety of people trying to prove they belonged to it. To understand the weight of the air in that room, you have to understand who my wife is. Sloane is not merely a participant in high society. She is one of its architects. She is a director of philanthropic strategy for a firm that manages endowments larger than the GDP of some small island nations. In the world of charity galas and silent auctions, Sloane is the person you want to impress because she is the one holding the checkbook. We had agreed on a strategy before we even parked the rental car. I was to be the silent partner, the decorative +1 in the sharp blazer. Holding her clutch while she navigated the Shark Tank, I was comfortable with that role. In fact, I preferred it. I had spent 9 years building a name for myself in a completely different industry, and I had no desire to mix my professional reputation with the radioactive waste of my personal history. As we moved from the valet stand into the pre-reception cocktail area, I watched the ecosystem of the wedding unfold. It was a masterclass in superficiality. The guests were not having conversations. They were exchanging resumes disguised as pleasantries. I saw men in tuxedos scanning the room over the shoulders of the people they were talking to, constantly looking for someone more important to ambush. I saw women whose jewelry was insured for more than my first apartment, assessing each other's worth with a single sweeping glance. Sloane was in her element. Within 3 minutes of entering the lobby, she had been stopped by 2 board members of a local museum and a venture capitalist who wanted her opinion on an environmental impact bond. I stood slightly behind her, sipping a glass of sparkling water, observing the theater of it all. That was when I saw them. My parents were holding court near a massive ice sculpture, acting out a performance I knew by heart. My father had his hand on the shoulder of a man I didn't recognize, nodding with that grave, serious expression he used to simulate empathy. My mother was clutching a lace handkerchief, dabbing at eyes that I knew were perfectly dry. They were selling the narrative. I could almost hear the script from across the room. They were the weary, self-sacrificing parents who had done everything right, who had poured their blood and treasure into raising 2 daughters, only to be challenged by life. They looked perfect. They looked like the victims of a story they had written themselves. And then there was the bride. My sister was standing near the entrance to the ballroom, bathed in the flattering light of a crystal chandelier. She looked triumphant, The dress was a masterpiece of structural engineering, a strapless gown that likely cost $20,000, paid for by the parents who had told me there was no money for my textbooks. She was laughing, tilting her head back to expose the long line of her neck, playing the role of the innocent, accomplished debutante. I overheard a woman near me, a guest with a voice like a foghorn, whispering to her companion, "She is such a delight. I heard she graduated top of her class, and so humble about it." I had to take a sip of water to keep from choking. My sister had barely graduated high school. The top of her class story was a fabrication, a shiny veneer pasted over a mediocre reality. It was terrifying to witness how easily they had rewritten history, erasing my academic struggles to fund her fantasy. I turned away, needing a moment to recalibrate. I walked toward a display of historical artifacts near the cloakroom, trying to find a quiet corner. The hotel had a gallery wall showcasing the history of the building and its benefactors. My eyes skimmed the bronze plaques, looking for a distraction. Then I stopped. There, on a polished brass plate listing the platinum benefactors of the Preservation Society, was a name that made my stomach turn over: the Klein Family Foundation. It was the groom's family. I stared at the name. It was not just a donation, it was a statement of power. The Kleins were not just rich, they were institutional. They were the kind of family that had buildings named after them, the kind of family that valued legacy above breathing. Suddenly, the engagement made perfect sense. My parents hadn't just found a husband for my sister, they had found a shield. They had attached themselves to a family whose reputation was so sterling, so unassailable, that it would act as a moral voucher for the Hayes family. Who would suspect the in-laws of the Klein family of being frauds? The marriage was a laundering operation for their reputation. I thought we agreed to just survive the ceremony. Sloane appeared at my elbow, her voice low and grounding. She followed my gaze to the plaque. She didn't say anything, but I saw her eyes narrow. She understood the implications immediately. "We are leaving," I said quietly. "As soon as the vows are done, I cannot breathe in here." "We can leave now," Sloane offered. We showed up, the boxes checked. I considered it. The urge to run was primal, but before I could answer, the atmosphere shifted. I felt it before I saw it. The air in the room seemed to compress. I turned and saw my sister moving through the crowd. She wasn't mingling. She was moving with purpose, cutting a straight line toward me. Her eyes were locked on my face, and there was nothing bridal about her expression. It was the look of a playground bully who realizes their victim has dared to show up on the swing set. She wasn't waiting for me to cause a scene. She was coming to ensure one happened on her terms. My mother was flanking her, moving in from the side, creating a pincer movement. They had spotted me the moment I stepped away from Sloane's protective radius. This was a tactical strike. I tried to step back, to retreat toward the main doors, but my mother was faster. She positioned herself perfectly, ensuring that a group of elderly, influential guests was within earshot. "Why is the missing piece here?" The phrase hit me like a physical blow. It was the line she had used in the hallway, the line she had been saving, but hearing it again, in this context, I realized the brilliance of her cruelty. She wasn't asking a question. She was planting a seed. By calling me the missing piece, she was implying that I was the one who had been lost, the one who was broken, the one who didn't fit. My sister arrived a second later, her face flushed with a mixture of adrenaline and rage. "She wasn't invited," my sister announced, her voice pitched to Carrie. She looked around at the guests who had stopped talking, her eyes wide and wet. "I didn't send an invitation. She is only here to destroy my happiness, just like she always tries to do." I stood very still. I saw the guests exchanging looks, pity for the bride, suspicion for the intruder. The narrative was taking hold, to them. I was the jealous older sister, the failure who had crawled out of the woodwork to ruin the golden child's moment. But as I looked at my mother and sister, really looked at them, the fear in my chest began to evaporate, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They were not attacking me because they thought I was weak. They were attacking me because I was standing straight. I was wearing a suit that I had paid for. I was standing next to a woman who commanded respect in rooms my father couldn't even enter. I was not the 18-year-old girl with the cardboard boxes and the tear-stained face. I was not the desperate student working the night shift. I was evidence. My very existence was a threat to the lie they had constructed. If people looked at me too closely, they would see that I wasn't the unstable daughter. They would see that I was successful, composed, and independent. And if I was those things, then their story about tough love and saving me from myself would crumble. They needed me to be a disaster. They needed me to scream. They needed me to be the villain so they could remain the heroes. My mother reached out, her fingers grazing my arm, her nails sharp. It was the physical cue for the security theater, the moment intended to provoke a reaction she could use against me. "Please," my mother said, her voice trembling with fake maternal sorrow, "don't make this about you. Everly, just go." I looked at her hand on my sleeve. I looked at the diamond bracelet on her wrist, a bracelet that probably cost more than my entire college tuition. "I am not making a scene. Mother," I said, my voice steady, dropping the volume so that the people nearby had to lean in to listen. "I am just a guest. Why are you so terrified of a guest?" That was the moment the fiancé, Mason, had stepped into the circle. That was the moment the dynamic broke. But in the seconds before his recognition shattered the room, I saw the truth in my mother's eyes. She wasn't afraid I would ruin the wedding. She was afraid I would ruin the illusion. And as I stood there, surrounded by the suffocating luxury of a life I was never supposed to have, I realized that for the first time in 27 years, I was the one holding the match. The silence that Mason had commanded lasted for exactly 4 seconds. It was a fragile thing, held together only by the sheer shock of his recognition, and my sister was not about to let it stand. She knew. With the instinct of a predator sensing a shift in the wind, that silence was dangerous. Silence gave people time to think. Silence gave people time to look at me, standing there in my tailored blazer, calm and dry-eyed, and compare me to the weeping, hysterical woman in the white dress. She needed noise. She needed chaos. She needed to drown out the cognitive dissonance that was starting to ripple through the crowd. "She is unstable!" my sister shrieked. It was a calculated explosion, loud enough to reach the back of the hallway. She grabbed Mason's arm, her fingers digging into his tuxedo jacket, trying physically to pull his attention back to her. "Mason, look at her. She is doing it again. She is psychotic. She is just jealous because I am getting everything she never could." It was a masterclass in labeling. Unstable, psychotic, jealous. These were not just insults. They were keywords. They were the planted flags of a narrative my family had been building for years. A shorthand designed to dismiss anything I said before I even opened my mouth. If I was unstable, my memories were delusions. If I was jealous, my grievances were petty. My father stepped in then, playing his part in the duet. He moved closer to Mason, placing a heavy paternal hand on the groom's shoulder. His voice was a rich baritone, pitched perfectly to sound like the long-suffering patriarch. "We have tried everything, Mason," my father said, shaking his head with a performative sadness that made my stomach turn. "We did our best with her, but some people just don't fit into a disciplined family structure. Some people are just broken." He looked at me with a gaze that was supposed to be disappointed love, but was actually sad warning. "Everly, please, don't embarrass yourself further. Just leave." The trap was set. They were waiting for me to scream. They needed me to scream. If I shouted, if I cried, if I stomped my foot and called them liars, I would prove them right. I would be the unstable daughter causing a scene at a wedding. They were banking on my anger. They were betting on the fact that the injustice of it all would make me lose control. But I had spent 9 years in boardrooms. I had spent 9 years negotiating with people who wanted to see me fail. I knew that in a situation like this, the person who speaks first loses. but the person who speaks loudest loses even faster. I did absolutely nothing. I stood perfectly still. I did not frown. I did not cry. I did not unclench my hands. I simply looked at them, my face a mask of polite, weary patience. It was the look you give a toddler having a tantrum in a grocery store. My silence was a wrench in their gears. My sister paused for a breath, expecting an interruption that didn't come, and in that split second of dead air, she looked deranged. She was screaming at a statue. The contrast between her red-faced hysteria and my absolute stillness was jarring. I saw a woman in a purple dress near the wall shift her weight, looking from my sister to me with a furrowed brow. The script wasn't working. Then, Sloane moved. She didn't make a big show of it. She didn't step in front of me to fight my battle. She simply stepped up beside me and took my hand. She interlaced her fingers with mine, a casual, intimate gesture of solidarity that screamed, "We are a unit." She looked at my parents with a cool, professional detachment, the same look she used when a grant applicant was trying to lie about their overhead costs. "We are not leaving," Sloane said. Her voice was not loud, but it had the crystal-clear projection of someone who is used to being listened to. "Everly is a guest. I am a guest. We have not raised our voices. We have not caused a scene. The only people shouting in this hallway are the hosts." My mother's eyes snapped to Sloane, and I saw a flash of pure venom. She hated Sloane instantly. She hated her because Sloane was beautiful. She hated her because she was wealthy. But mostly, she hated her because she was standing next to me. Sloane represented a reality where I was lovable. Sloane represented a world where I had support. My mother decided to change tactics. If she couldn't break me, she would devalue me. "Oh, I see," my mother said, letting out a short, cruel laugh. She looked Sloane up and down, sneering at her jumpsuit. "So she found someone else to pay her bills. That figures. Everly never could make it on her own. She always needs someone to carry her. I hope you have deep pockets, dear. She is an expensive burden." It was a low blow. It was an attempt to strip away my achievements, to paint me as a leech, to tell the room that even my nice suit and my confident wife were just more charity I had scrounged up. I felt Sloane's hand tighten in mine, a warning that she was about to verbally dismantle my mother, but I squeezed back. "No, this one is mine." I took a half step forward. I didn't look at my mother. I looked directly at Mason. "I paid for my own flight." "Mason," I said. My voice was calm, conversational. "I paid for this suit. I paid off my student loans 3 years ago. I own my home. I am not here to ask for money. I am not here to ask for an apology. I am here because I received an invitation, and I thought, mistakenly, that enough time had passed for us to be civil." I paused, letting the words settle. "I don't want their money," I said, gesturing slightly to my parents. "I just want the basic respect you would give to a stranger on the street." Mason was staring at me. He was listening to every word, his eyes darting back and forth between my face and the faces of his future in-laws. He was a smart man. He dealt with high-stakes finance. He knew how to spot a bluff, and right now, he was looking at a data set that didn't make sense. On one side, he had his fiancé and her parents, screaming, insulting, sweating, desperate to eject a guest. On the other side, he had me, calm, factual, reasonable. The unstable daughter was acting like a diplomat. The perfect family was acting like a mob. Mason pulled his arm away from my sister's grip. It wasn't a violent motion, but it was decisive. My sister stumbled slightly in her heels, shocked by the loss of contact. "Mason?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Baby, why are you listening to her? Call security. Please, just get them out." Mason looked down at her. For the first time, I saw something other than adoration in his eyes. I saw irritation. I saw doubt. "Why?" Mason asked. It was a simple question, but it landed like a grenade. "What?" My sister blinked. "Why do I need to call security?" Mason asked, his voice flat. "She is standing there. She isn't shouting. She isn't threatening anyone. She is your sister. Why are you so afraid of her standing in a hallway? My father stepped in, sensing the danger. Mason, this isn't the time for a debate. It is about stress. Your bride is stressed. We need to protect the bride. I am not protecting anyone from a woman standing still, Mason said. He looked back at me. You said you paid off your loans? It was a weird question to ask in the middle of a wedding crisis. But I knew why he asked it. He was thinking about the story they had told him. They had probably told him I was a financial drain. They had probably told him I was destitute. Every cent, I said, and I did it without a cosigner. Mason's face tightened. He looked at my father. You told me she was in rehab for the last 5 years. You told me that was why we couldn't invite her. The air in the hallway seemed to vanish. I didn't react, though the lie was new to me. Rehab, of course. That was how they explained my absence. It was the perfect upper-middle-class excuse. It garnered sympathy while discrediting everything I might say. Poor Everly. She has struggles. She lies, my mother said quickly. Too quickly. She is a pathological liar. Mason, that is part of her sickness. She invents lies. I can show you my tax returns, I said dryly. I can show you my deed. I can show you my sobriety chips. Oh, wait. I don't have those, because I have never been to rehab. Mason looked at his bride. My sister was pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She looked terrified, not angry anymore, terrified. Call security! She screamed suddenly, abandoning all pretense of grace. She grabbed Mason's lapels, shaking him. If you love me, you will get her out of here right now. Stop talking to her. Stop looking at her. It was a fatal error. Mason looked at her hands on his jacket. He looked at her contorted face. He looked at the woman he was supposed to marry, and he saw the cracks in the porcelain. Let go of me, Mason said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The coldness in his voice was absolute. My sister froze. She dropped her hands. The guests were no longer pretending to mingle. The pretense of politeness had evaporated. Everyone was watching. Phones were out. I saw the red recording lights blinking from waist height. This was going to be on the internet before the cake was cut. A man stepped out of the crowd. He wasn't security. He was older, wearing a suit that looked older than me, with a face that had seen too many boardrooms and too many lies. He held a glass of scotch in one hand and walked with the casual entitlement of someone who owns the building. He walked right up to the circle of conflict, ignoring the social boundary. He looked at me, then he looked at Mason. You know, the man said, his voice raspy and amused, I have been to 4 weddings this year. They are usually boring. But this? He gestured with his glass between me and my family. This feels like a deposition. He looked at my father. You look sweaty. Hayes, why are you sweating? It is 68 degrees in here. My father glared at him. This is a private family matter. Mr. Sterling, it is in a public hallway. Mr. Sterling replied, taking a sip of his drink. And your daughter, the one in the blazer, who isn't hiding something. Mr. Sterling turned to me. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and deeply curious. You are the one who supposedly doesn't exist? The troubled one? I suppose so, I said. Funny, he said, glancing at Mason. She looks a hell of a lot like the girl in that old scholarship file I saw on your desk last week. Mason, the one you were scratching your head over. Mason's head snapped toward the man. Sterling? I have a good memory for names, Sterling said, smiling a shark-like smile. And for discrepancies. The word hung in the air. Discrepancies. My sister let out a small, strangled sound. My mother looked like she was about to faint. For real this time. Mason looked at me, and the pieces finally clicked. The confusion left his face, replaced by a dawning, horrified realization. He wasn't just looking at a family drama anymore. He was looking at a crime scene. Everly, Mason said, his voice hollow. We need to talk. Not here. Now. No, my sister shouted, grabbing for him again. We have a ceremony. The guests are waiting. "The guests can wait," Mason said, without looking at her. "I am not walking down an aisle until I know who exactly I am walking with." The question Mason asked was so incongruous with the setting that it took my brain a full 3 seconds to process the English language. We were standing in a hallway lined with silk wallpaper, smelling of expensive perfume and impending disaster, and the groom, a man whose tuxedo probably cost more than my car, was asking me about a scholarship application from nearly a decade ago. "Did you apply for the Briarwell Scholars Program?" Mason repeated, his voice dropping an octave, losing the social politeness and gaining a sharp, interrogative edge. 9 years ago, the academic cycle ending in May. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had not heard that name spoken aloud in years, but it still carried a phantom ache, like a bone that had broken badly and never set right. The Briarwell Scholars was not just a scholarship, it was the scholarship. It was a full-ride endowment, complete with a living stipend, a laptop, and guaranteed internships, awarded to only 10 students in the state who demonstrated exceptional resilience and intellectual promise. I remembered the essay I had written for it. I had typed it on a library computer, staying until closing time, pouring out everything I couldn't say at home about the suffocating pressure of conditional love. I had checked the mailbox every single day for 3 months. I had prayed to a God I wasn't sure I believed in, and then nothing. No rejection letter, no acceptance, just silence. I had assumed, in my teenage insecurity, that I wasn't even good enough to merit a form letter saying no. "Yes," I whispered, my throat suddenly dry. I applied. It was my dream, but I never heard back. Mason stared at me. His eyes were not hostile anymore. They were calculating. He was looking at me like I was a spreadsheet that didn't balance. "You never heard back," he repeated, testing the words. "No," I said, my voice gaining a little strength. "I assumed I didn't make the cut. I assumed my application went into a shredder somewhere." Mason let out a short, incredulous breath. He turned his body fully away from my sister, ignoring her hand, which was still hovering near his elbow. "You didn't go into a shredder. Everly. I sat on the junior review board that year. It was my first year evaluating candidates for my grandfather's trust. I read your essay." He paused, and the look he gave me was piercing. I remember it because it was the only one that made the selection committee stop arguing. "You weren't just a candidate. You were the unanimous first choice. Your file was marked rare. That is the highest classification we have." The room seemed to tilt. I felt Sloane's hand squeeze mine so hard it almost hurt. First choice. I had been the first choice. "I don't understand," I said. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to be strong. I was just 18 years old again, confused and hurt. If I was the first choice, why did no one call me? Mason pivoted on his heel to face my parents. My mother was clutching her clutch bag like a weapon. My father was looking at a point somewhere over Mason's left shoulder, his jaw set in a line of grim determination. "That is a fascinating question," Mason said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Why did she not get the call? Mr. Hayes? Mrs. Hayes? Do you want to explain why a girl who was working night shifts to buy textbooks disappeared from our process?" My mother let out a nervous titter. It was a terrible sound, high and brittle. "Oh, Mason, honestly, this is ancient history. Who remembers the details of paperwork from 9 years ago?" The girl was confused. She was going through a phase. She decided she wasn't ready for that kind of pressure. She waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. She withdrew. She wanted to be independent. Isn't that right? Everly, you always wanted to do things your own way. It was a gaslight so brazen, so audacious, that it almost commanded respect. She was trying to rewrite reality in front of witnesses. Mason did not blink. "She withdrew," he said flatly. "Yes," my father added, his voice booming with false confidence. "She told us she didn't want the charity. She wanted to work. We respected her decision. Of course, it was hard for us to watch her struggle, but we let her go her own path." Mason reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a slim, metallic smartphone. He tapped the screen a few times, his movements precise and angry. "That is funny," Mason said, not looking up from the screen. "Because the Briarwell Foundation keeps digital records forever. We have to. It is a federal compliance requirement for our tax status. I was looking at the archives last week because I saw the name Hayes on the wedding guest list, and I wanted to see if there was a relation. I assumed it was a cousin." He turned the screen toward my parents. I couldn't see the text from where I stood, but I saw the color drain out of my father's face until he looked like gray putty. "Status: declined by applicant," Mason read aloud. "Date: May 2nd. Method: electronic portal. Verification." He looked up, his eyes hard as flint. "The system says you declined the offer. Everly, it says you logged into the secure portal. Check the box that said, 'I decline this award in favor of other opportunities,' and signed it with a digital signature." I stared at him. "I didn't have a computer," I said. "I didn't have internet access at home because my parents cut it off to help me focus. I did all my applications at the school library. And on May 2nd, I was working a double shift at the grocery store because my car had broken down, and I needed the repair money. I never saw an offer. I never logged into a portal. I didn't even know I had won." The implication of my words hit the group like a shockwave. If I didn't decline the scholarship, someone else had done it for me. Mason looked at my mother, then he looked at my sister. My sister, the bride, was biting her lip so hard I thought it would bleed. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with the man she was supposed to marry in an hour. "May 2nd, Mason said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. That was the same week the foundation received a request to transfer the unused funds from the declined Hayes allocation to a secondary grant pool, a pool that, if I remember correctly, often supports local community enrichment, or in some cases, private donations. He wasn't just talking about a lost scholarship anymore. He was talking about fraud. He was talking about identity theft. He was talking about a federal crime committed across state lines involving a charitable trust. "Mason!" my sister suddenly burst out, stepping between him and her parents. "Stop it! This is my wedding day. Who cares about some stupid scholarship from 1,000,000 years ago? She is lying. She probably forgot she declined it. She was always on drugs back then. She doesn't remember anything." It was the rehab lie again. She was doubling down. Mason looked at her. He looked at the woman in the white dress, the woman he had undoubtedly thought was kind and honest and pure, and he saw the desperation of a cornered animal. "She wasn't on drugs, Monica," Mason said coldly. "She was working at a supermarket, and you know how I know she didn't decline it?" "How?" my sister challenged, her voice shrill. "Because the IP address that logged into the portal to decline the award didn't come from a public library," Mason said. "It came from a residential address, specifically, the Hayes family residence." My mother gasped. It was involuntary, a sharp intake of air that sealed her guilt better than a confession. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. They hadn't just ignored me. They hadn't just cut me off. They had actively intercepted the lifeline that would have saved me. They had seen the email. They had seen the offer of a full life, a debt-free start, a recognition of my worth, and they had clicked decline. They had deleted my future from the comfort of their living room, probably while I was scrubbing floors or stacking shelves to buy food. Why? To teach me a lesson? To keep me under their thumb? Or was it something worse? Was it just pure, unadulterated spite because I had succeeded without them? "You intercepted it," I said. My voice was trembling, not with sadness, but with a rage so hot it felt like ice. "You saw I won, and you threw it away." "We did what was best for the family," my father snapped, losing his composure for the first time. "You were leaving. You were abandoning us. You didn't deserve a reward for being selfish." "Deserve?" Mason repeated the word. He stepped back, putting physical distance between himself and the Hayes clan. He looked at his hands, as if checking to see if they were dirty. "I am a Klein," Mason said. "My family built this town. We built the library, we built the hospital, and we built the Briarwell Scholars to find people with integrity." He looked at my sister, then at my parents. His expression was one of absolute revulsion. "If this is fake," Mason said, gesturing to the scene, to the wedding, to the relationship, "then I need to rethink everything. Because if what I am hearing is true, I am about to marry into a family that knows how to delete other people's futures just to keep control." "Mason, baby, don't say that," my sister pleaded, reaching for him again. "It was just a misunderstanding. It was paperwork. We can fix it. Daddy can fix it." "Fix it?" Mason laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You can't fix a federal wire fraud charge with a check from Daddy. Monica, falsifying records on a charitable trust isn't a family squabble. It is a felony." The word felony hung in the air. The guests who were close enough to hear it stopped pretending to be polite. The man named Sterling, the one who had started this, raised his glass in a silent toast to me. I looked at my parents. They were no longer the formidable giants of my childhood. They looked small. They looked terrified. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that their money and their social standing stopped at the edge of the law, and they had just sprinted past that edge in front of the one family that could hold them accountable. "I think," Sloane said, her voice cutting through the tension like a laser, "that we should call a lawyer, not for us, for you." She pointed a manicured finger at my father. Mason looked at me. "Everly," he said, "I am sorry. Don't apologize to me," I said, my voice hard. "Just ask them one thing. Ask them who got the money." Mason frowned. "What?" "If I declined the scholarship," I said, staring at my father. "The money had to go somewhere. The Briarwell Charter says unused funds must be reallocated within the same fiscal year. So if I didn't get it, and no other student got it, where did $50,000 a year go?" My father went from gray to white. My mother stopped breathing. And in that silence, everyone knew. The secret wasn't just that they hated me. The secret was that they had stolen from me, and they had used my name to do it. The transformation of a wedding into a crime scene is a subtle process. There is no yellow tape, no flashing lights, and no sirens. There is only the sudden, terrifying clarity of questions that should never be asked while wearing a tuxedo. Mason Klein did not scream. He did not throw his hands up in the air. He simply turned his body 45 degrees so that his back was to the guests and his face was directly in front of the woman he was scheduled to marry in less than an hour. The shift in his demeanor was surgical. He went from being a groom, a role defined by hope and blindness, to being a trustee of a billion-dollar endowment. "Monica," Mason said. His voice was level, stripping away all the affection, leaving only the raw data. "I want you to answer a very simple question. And before you speak, I want you to look at your sister standing there, the sister you said was a burnout, and remember that lying right now is going to be much worse than the truth." My sister looked like a deer caught not in headlights, but in the crosshairs of a rifle. She tried to laugh, a bubbling, hysterical sound that died in her throat. She looked at our mother for a cue, but our mother was frozen, her face a mask of terrified calculation. "Mason, don't be silly," Monica said, her voice trembling. "This is crazy. You are letting her get in your head." "Answer the question," Mason interrupted. "Where did you go to school? Specifically, which college? Which year? And did you ever, at any point, receive a check drawn from the Klein Community Grant or the Briarwell Scholars Trust?" The hallway went dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. Monica blinked rapidly. I went to State. You know that. I did the arts program." "You told me you went to State," Mason corrected. "But I never saw a diploma. I never saw a transcript. And when we talked about your student loans, you told me your parents paid for everything cash because they wanted you to be debt-free." He took a step closer to her. But your parents just told Everly that they believe in independence. They told her to starve so she could build character. So why did they pay $50,000 a year for you to study arts while your sister was scrubbing floors? Because they love me, Monica shouted. It was a childish, petulant outburst, but it carried a dark undercurrent. Because I didn't run away. I stayed. I was the good daughter. You were the expensive daughter, Mason said. And I think I know who paid for it. He pulled his phone back out, unlocking it with a thumbprint. There is a grant code, he said, reading from the screen. Allocation number B492. It is a redirect code. It is used when a primary scholarship recipient declines their award, and the funds are moved to a hardship category for emergency distribution. He looked up at my father. That code was activated on May 5th, 9 years ago, 3 days after Everly supposedly declined her full ride. The funds were transferred to a private account under the name Hayes Education Trust. I assumed that was a legitimate charity. But looking at you now, and looking at your daughter's designer dress, and looking at the sister you tried to erase, I am starting to think that trust has only one beneficiary. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just that they had stopped me from getting the money. It was that they had taken it. They had impersonated me to decline the offer, then used their influence or some loophole to catch the rebound funds. They had literally cannibalized my future to feed Monica's vanity. Mason, stop, my father said. He stepped forward, putting on his best boardroom voice, the one he used when he was trying to negotiate a settlement for a zoning violation. He tried to put a hand on Mason's shoulder, but Mason sidestepped it with a fluid, repulsed motion. This is not the place for this conversation, my father said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial rumble. We are in public, Mason. There are important people here. Your family is here. Do you really want to drag the Klein name through the mud over a clerical error from a decade ago? He forced a smile, looking around at the guests who were now openly staring. Let's go into the bridal suite. Just family. We can clear this up in 5 minutes. It is just a misunderstanding of how the funds were categorized. I can explain everything. It was the classic move of a guilty man. Control the venue. If he could get Mason behind closed doors, he could manipulate him. He could beg. He could threaten. He could bribe. But out here, in the hallway, under the unforgiving lights and the gaze of 50 witnesses, he was powerless. There is nothing to explain behind a closed door that you cannot say in front of your daughter, Mason said. He pointed at me. She is the one you defrauded. If you have an explanation, give it to her. My mother saw that the reasonable man approach was failing, so she deployed the nuclear option, emotional devastation. She let out a sob. It was a loud, wailing sound that was theatrically perfect. She grabbed Monica's hand and looked at Mason with wide, tear-filled eyes. How can you do this? She cried. This is the happiest day of Monica's life. We have planned this for 2 years. Look at her. She is in her wedding dress, and you are treating her like a criminal because of some dusty old paperwork? Because of her? She gestured at me with supreme disgust. Everly comes here to ruin us, and you help her? You are destroying this family on a wedding day. Have you no heart? It was a powerful performance. I saw a few guests waver. The sight of a crying mother of the bride is a potent cultural symbol. It triggers an instinct to soothe, to forgive, to smooth things over. For a second, I thought it might work. I thought Mason might back down, overwhelmed by the sheer social pressure to not be the villain who ruins a wedding. But Mason did not look at my mother. He looked at me. He looked at the cheap watch I was wearing, a practical thing I bought for work, and compared it to the diamond tennis bracelet on Monica's wrist. He looked at the timeline in his head. He looked at the cruelty required to take a life-changing opportunity from one child and give it to the other as a party favor. Mrs. Hayes, Mason said. His voice was incredibly soft, which made it carry further than a shout. Truth does not ruin a happy day. He paused, letting the words hang there. Truth only ruins lies. And if this wedding is built on a lie, then it is already ruined. I am just the one turning on the lights. He looked back at his phone. I am calling the fund manager. I am calling the internal auditor for the Briarwell Trust. We are going to track that grant code right now. We are going to see exactly whose bank account it landed in and who signed for it. He raised the phone to his ear. That was when the facade broke completely. Monica moved. It wasn't the movement of a blushing bride. It was the movement of a cornered animal reacting to a threat. She lunged forward, her hands clawing out, and snatched the phone from Mason's ear. It happened so fast that for a second, no one understood what they were seeing. The bride, in her $20,000 lace gown, was wrestling with the groom. She gripped the phone with both hands, her knuckles white, hugging it to her chest as if it were a grenade she had to keep from exploding. "No!" Monica screamed. "No! You are not calling anyone! You are not ruining this!" Mason stood there, his hand still raised in the position of holding a phone that was no longer there. He looked at his empty hand, then he looked at Monica. The look on his face was not anger, it was something far more final. It was the look of a man realizing he had been sleeping next to a stranger. "Monica," he said, his voice flat. "Give me the phone." "No!" she shrieked, backing away, stumbling on her train. "You just want to hurt us. You just want to believe her. It is my money. It was family money. We had a right to it. It is my money." The confession was accidental, born of panic, but it rang out like a gunshot. "It wasn't family money," Mason said. "It was trust money. It was charitable money, and it was assigned to a specific Social Security number, mine to give, Everly's to receive." The hallway erupted. The low murmur of the crowd swelled into a buzz of shocked conversation. I saw the man named Sterling turn to the woman next to him and say something that looked like, "I told you so." But more importantly, I saw the phones. People were not just watching anymore, they were documenting. I saw the distinct rectangular shapes of smartphones held up at chest level. I saw the red dots of video recording apps, the wealthy, the elite, the friends of the Klein family. They were all filming the implosion of the Hayes family. My father lunged for Monica, trying to grab the phone from her to mitigate the damage, to stop her from saying anything else incriminating. "Monica, give it to me. Stop talking." "No, Daddy," she cried, pulling away from him too. "He is going to send us to jail. He said felony. You said it was safe. You said she would never know." "You said she would never know." I felt Sloane's arm go around my waist, holding me up. I hadn't realized I was shaking. I was watching my sister and father turn on each other in a panic, revealing the architecture of their betrayal in real time. They had discussed it. They had planned it. They had assured each other that I was too broken, too poor, too far away to ever find out. Mason watched them scuffle for the phone, a pathetic, undignified struggle between a father and daughter in formal wear. He didn't try to get it back. He didn't need the phone anymore. He had the truth. He turned to me. His face was pale, stripped of all color, but his eyes were clear. "Everly," he said, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened the day you left, every detail, because I am going to make sure the police report is accurate." "Police?" my mother gasped. "Mason, we are family." "No," Mason said, turning his back on them to face me. "You are people who stole a scholarship from a teenager to buy a lifestyle you couldn't afford. That isn't family. That is predation." He looked at me, waiting. And in that moment, with the cameras rolling and the guests whispering and my family disintegrating into chaos, I realized I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was the star witness. Sloane's phone vibrated against her palm. It was a short, sharp buzz, distinct from the murmur of the crowd and the sound of my sister weeping over a lost wedding. Sloane looked down at the screen, her brow furrowing in that precise way she did when she found a discrepancy in a contract. She didn't speak immediately. She tapped the screen, scrolling up, then looked at my mother with an expression of pure, icy disbelief. "Everly," Sloane said, her voice cutting through the ambient noise like a scalpel. "You need to see this." She turned the phone toward me. It was a message from her assistant, who was covering the emergency line at our firm over the weekend. The text was simple. "Heads up. Weird call came into the main switchboard 5 minutes ago. Woman claiming to be Everly's mother asking for HR records. Said she needed to verify employment dates for a mental health intervention. I told her to get a warrant. Thought you should know." I stared at the timestamp. 5 minutes ago, while we were standing in this hallway, while my mother was crying about family unity and begging Mason not to ruin the day, she had slipped away or used a second phone to call my employer. She wasn't just defending herself. She was actively building the trap. She was trying to plant the seed of my insanity at my job, ensuring that if I spoke out, I would already be discredited professionally. It was a scorched earth tactic. If she went down, she was determined to take my career with her. "You called my boss," I said. It wasn't a question. I looked at my mother, who was currently dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the victim perfectly. "You stood right there, told Mason you wanted peace, and then you called my firm to tell them I was having a mental breakdown." My mother froze. The handkerchief stopped halfway to her face. She blinked, and for a split second, the mask slipped, revealing the calculating panic underneath. "I was worried about you," she said, her voice trembling with false concern. "I just wanted to make sure you were stable, given your history." "My history is perfect," I said, my voice rising just enough to be heard by the circle of people around us. "My history is spotless until you try to rewrite it." Mason had seen enough. He turned to a young man standing near the wall, his personal assistant, who had been hovering with a laptop bag since the confrontation began. Mason snapped his fingers. The assistant moved instantly, unzipping the bag and handing Mason a sleek, silver laptop. Mason didn't look at the bride. He didn't look at the guests. He placed the laptop on a high cocktail table, sweeping a centerpiece of white roses onto the floor with a crash that made everyone jump. He didn't even flinch at the sound of breaking glass. He just opened the lid and started typing. "Let's look at the history," Mason said. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He was logging into the administrative backend of the Briarwell Foundation. Because unlike memory, servers don't lie. He brought up a screen filled with lines of code and metadata. "Here is the decline form," he said, pointing to the screen. "Dated May 2nd, 9 years ago, validated by a user logged in as E_Hayes_applicant. He tapped a few more keys. "And here's the digital footprint. Every transaction has an origin point, a geolocation tag." He turned the screen around so we could all see. A map popped up, with a single red pin dropped right in the middle of a sprawling suburban estate. "That is 104 Maplewood Drive," Mason said. "That is the Hayes family residence. The IP address is static. It belongs to a residential cable account registered to—" He scrolled down. "Thomas Hayes." I stared at the map. I knew that house. I knew the room where the router sat. Blinking in the dark of the study, I wasn't allowed to enter without knocking. "I didn't have the password to the Wi-Fi," I said, my voice shaking. "You changed it every week. You said the internet was a distraction. I had to go to the library to check my email. I couldn't have logged in from home even if I wanted to." Mason looked at my father. "So, Thomas, if Everly didn't have the password, and she was at work, who logged in as her? Who sat at your computer, used her personal information, and clicked the button that threw away $200,000 of education?" My father didn't look at the map. He looked at Mason, and his face hardened. The panic was gone, replaced by the ugly, defensive arrogance of a man who believes he is above consequences. "This is ridiculous," my father spat. "You are hacking private data. That is illegal. Mason, and frankly, this is a family matter. We made a decision as parents. We decided she wasn't ready for that school. We managed her expectations." "You managed her identity," Mason shouted. "You impersonated her. That is not parenting. That is fraud." "Lower your voice," my father hissed, stepping closer, his eyes narrowing. You want to talk about fraud? Let's talk about reputation. You marry Monica, and this goes away. We call it a clerical error. We fix the books. But you keep pushing this? You keep digging? We will go to the press. We will tell them Everly is unstable. We have doctors who will say what we pay them to say. We will say you are abusing your power as a trustee to attack your in-laws. Think about the optics. Mason. It was a threat. A direct, naked threat. Don't expose us, or we will destroy her reputation and tarnish yours. I looked at them. They were willing to burn everything down to save their own skins. They were willing to paint me as crazy, to ruin my career, to drag Mason's family name through the mud, just to hide the fact that they were thieves. And that was when something inside me snapped, not into anger, but into cold resolve. You can't say I'm unstable, I said quietly. We can say whatever we want. My father sneered. Who are they going to believe? The successful parents or the runaway daughter? They will believe the signature, I said. My father paused. What signature? It was digital. No, I said. Not the digital one, the paper one. I looked at my mother. Do you remember the week before I left? You came to my room. You brought a stack of papers. You said they were tax documents for the family business. You said because I was 18, I needed to sign a waiver so you could claim me as a dependent for one last year. My mother's face went slack. Her eyes widened, the color draining away until she looked like a wax figure. I remember, I continued, my voice gaining strength. I remember because I thought it was strange. You never involved me in the business. I read the top page. It looked like a standard tax form. But when I lifted the corner, the page underneath wasn't a tax form. I took a step toward them. It was a power of attorney, a limited power of attorney granting you the right to manage educational assets and financial aid on my behalf. The silence in the hallway was absolute. I didn't sign it, I said. I gave the pen back to you. I told you I wanted to read it first. You got angry. You snatched the papers away and stormed out. You said I was being difficult. You said I didn't trust my own mother. I looked at Mason. They needed that paper. Even with the digital login, to move the money to a different account, the bank would have required a physical signature on file authorizing the transfer of funds to a third party. They needed me to sign away my rights. I turned back to my father. I didn't sign it, so if there's a document in that file with my name on it, who signed it? My mother let out a small, strangled sound. She looked at my father, panic flaring in her eyes. It was a look of shared guilt, a telepathic exchange of terror. She remembers. She wasn't just a stupid kid. She remembers. Mason saw the look. He saw the hesitation, and he knew. My God, Mason whispered. You forged it. He looked at my father with a mixture of awe and disgust. You didn't just click a button. You physically forged her signature on a transfer authorization document. That is forgery in the first degree. That is a minimum of 5 years in federal prison. My father opened his mouth to speak, to deny it, to spin another lie. But no words came out. He looked at the laptop. He looked at the phones recording him. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw my father look truly, completely small. I didn't sign anything, I said again, ensuring the recording phones caught it clearly. So if you have a piece of paper that says I did, you better hope you burned it, because Mason is going to find it. My mother grabbed my father's arm, her fingernails digging into his suit jacket. Thomas, she whispered, her voice cracking. Thomas, do something. But there was nothing to do. The truth was out. It wasn't a rumor anymore. It wasn't a family squabble. It was a paper trail, and the trail led straight to them. We walked out of the Golden Magnolia Hotel with the kind of brisk, synchronized efficiency usually reserved for evacuating a building before a bomb goes off. The air outside was heavy and humid, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled tension of the hallway, but it felt clean. I took the first deep breath I had managed in 2 hours. The valet brought our car around. a modest sedan that looked almost invisible next to the lineup of luxury SUVs and vintage convertibles, and as I slid into the passenger seat, I felt a strange sensation in my hands. They were not shaking, they were steady. Sloane started the engine and pulled out onto the main road without saying a word. She drove for 3 blocks before she reached over and turned the radio off. The silence in the car was not empty. It was full of the things we didn't need to say. We both knew that we hadn't just left a wedding, we had left a demolition site. "You know they are going to come after you," Sloane said, her eyes on the road. "They are cornered. People like your parents don't apologize when they are cornered. They bite." "I know," I said, "but they don't have teeth anymore. They just have gums." My phone buzzed against the center console. It wasn't a text. It was a call. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't expected to see so soon. Mason Klein. I stared at it. "He is supposed to be at his reception." "Answer it," Sloane said. "Put it on speaker." I tapped the icon and the interior of the car was filled with the sound of Mason's breathing. It was ragged, fast, the sound of a man pacing in a small room. "Everly?" His voice was tight. "I'm here. Mason?" I said. "We left. I didn't think staying was a good idea." "Don't apologize," Mason said. "I am in the manager's office. I have the fund auditor on the other line. We just ran a trace on the routing number for that grant allocation." I felt my stomach tighten. "And?" "It didn't go to a charity," Mason said. The anger in his voice was cold and precise. "The Hayes Education Trust isn't a 501c3. It is a private shell, LLC, registered in Delaware. The signatory on the account is Thomas Hayes. But the beneficiary, the person whose expenses were paid directly from that account for the last 4 years, isn't a charitable cause." He paused, and I could hear the rustle of papers. "It paid for tuition at State College," Mason said. "It paid for a luxury apartment lease in the city. It paid for a leased BMW, and the student ID associated with the tuition payments belongs to Monica Hayes." I closed my eyes. Hearing it confirmed was different from suspecting it. It was one thing to know your parents favored your sister. It was another thing to know that they had stolen the specific future you had earned, the very scholarship that was supposed to liberate you, and used it to buy her a BMW. They hadn't just given her money. They had given her my money. Every time she drove that car, every time she walked into her apartment, she was living inside the ghost of my hard work. "She knew," I said softly. "Monica knew." "She claims she didn't," Mason said, his voice dripping with disgust. "She is in the other room crying, saying she thought it was just Daddy's money. But she signed the checks. Everly. Her signature is on the lease endorsements. She was 21 years old. She knew she wasn't on a scholarship, and she knew your parents weren't that rich." "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I am going to finish this audit," Mason said. "And then I am going to have a very long conversation with the district attorney. But I need one thing from you. Name it." "I need proof that you were under duress," Mason said. "Your father is already spinning a story. He is telling people you were mentally incompetent, and he had power of attorney to manage your affairs. He is going to try to make the forgery look like a protective measure. I need something that proves he was lying about your state of mind, something that proves this was malice, not protection." "I have it," I said. "Check your email in 10 minutes." I hung up the phone. Sloane glanced at me. "The folder?" "The folder," I confirmed. I opened my laptop, which I had brought with me because I never traveled without my work. I pulled up the encrypted drive I had carried from apartment to apartment for 9 years. The folder was named simply, "That was my exit strategy. Separate the pieces and stop reacting." Inside, there were dozens of files, scans of pay stubs, photos of my small, bare room, but the most important files were the audio recordings. I scrolled down to the dates from that spring: April 24th, April 28th, May 1st. I clicked on the file dated May 1st, the day before the scholarship was declined. I put my headphones in. not wanting to fill the car with the sound of my father's voice. But Sloane reached over and unplugged them. "Let me hear it," she said. "We are in this together." I pressed play. The audio was grainy, recorded on an old phone in a pocket, but the voices were clear. It was the sound of a kitchen argument. The hum of the refrigerator was audible in the background. My father's voice. "You are delusional. Everly, you think you are going to go to that school and fit in? You are a worker. You are not a scholar. You are going to embarrass us." My voice, young and wavering. "I got in. The letter says I have promise." My mother's voice. "Promise? You have arrogance. That is what you have. You want to go there to get away from us. You want to be better than us. Well, let me tell you something. You are nothing without this family. You are a leech. You drain us dry and then you ask for more. You are not going anywhere unless we say so." My father's voice. "We are doing this for your own good. We are cutting you off so you learn. If you want to go to school, you pay for it. Every cent. Don't expect a dime from us. You want independence? Go starve for it." The recording ended with the sound of a door slamming. The car was silent again. "He called you a leech," Sloane said, her voice devoid of emotion but terrifyingly intense. "While he was planning to steal $50,000 a year from you." "Yes," I said. "And the next day, the scholarship was declined." "Send it," Sloane said. "But don't just send it to Mason. Send it to the Briarwell Compliance Office. Make it official. If you send it to Mason, it is a family dispute. If you send it to the compliance officer, it is evidence in an active fraud investigation." She was right. Sloane was always right about strategy. Retaliation is emotional. Justice is bureaucratic. I drafted the email. I kept it clinical. Subject: Compliance Inquiry / Grant Reference B-4-9-2 / Affidavit of Identity, to whom it may concern. I am writing to formally contest the status of the Briarwell Scholarship offer dated May 2nd. 9 years prior, I did not decline this offer. I did not authorize any transfer of funds. I did not sign any power of attorney granting Thomas or Martha Hayes the right to act on my behalf. Attached are 2 audio files recorded on the dates in question, demonstrating that my parents were aware of my desire to attend and were actively hostile toward my independence. These recordings contradict any claim of protective financial management. I am prepared to provide a sworn statement and handwriting samples to verify that the signature on the decline form is a forgery. Sincerely, Everly Hayes. I hit send. The little swooshing sound of the email leaving my outbox felt like the closing of a heavy book. It was done. I wasn't the 18-year-old girl crying in her room anymore. I was a woman who knew how to file a grievance. 2 minutes later, my phone exploded. It started with a text from my mother, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. Mother: "Everly, please answer the phone." Mother: "Dad is having chest pains. You are killing him." Mother: "We are family. We can work this out. We can pay you back." Mother: "Family emergency. Come back to the hotel now." I looked at the messages scrolling down the screen. Chest pains. Pay you back. Emergency. It was the classic narcissist's playbook. First they attack, then they play the victim, then they try to bribe you, and finally, they manufacture a crisis to force you back into their orbit. "She says Dad is having chest pains," I told Sloane. Sloane didn't even tap the brakes. "If he is having chest pains, she should call an ambulance, not the daughter she robbed. It is a manipulation. Everly, do not reply." "I'm not going to," I said. I turned the phone over, face down. But a minute later, it rang again. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't Mason. It was a number I didn't recognize. With a local area code. I hesitated, then picked it up. "Hello? Ms. Hayes?" The voice was male, older, raspy, and calm. It sounded like expensive scotch and cigars. I recognized it immediately. It was Mr. Sterling, the man from the hallway. "Mr. Sterling?" I said. "Call me Arthur," he said. "I am sitting here with the Klein family lawyer, and Mason, Of course. Although Mason is currently drinking a very large whiskey and staring at a wall. What do you want? I asked, keeping my guard up. We want to meet, Sterling said. Not at the hotel. There is a quiet bistro about 5 miles north. The Klein family appreciates clarity. We are looking at the documents Mason pulled. We are looking at the map. And frankly, the holes in your father's story are big enough to drive a truck through. I already sent my statement to the foundation, I said. Good, Sterling said. That shows you are serious. We aren't asking you to stop. In fact, we want to make sure you have everything you need. The Kleins are very protective of their reputation. Everly, and right now, they realize that the best way to protect their reputation is to distance themselves from your parents as fast as humanly possible. But they need to know the full scope of the infection before they amputate the limb. He paused. There is also the matter of the checks, the ones Monica signed. We think you should see them. I felt a cold chill. The checks. The physical proof that my sister had spent my future on lattes and handbags. Why are you helping me? I asked. I ruined the wedding. You didn't ruin the wedding, kid, Sterling said, his voice softening slightly. You saved Mason from marrying into a felony. The Kleins pay their debts, and it looks like they owe you about $400,000 plus interest. I looked at Sloane. She nodded. Send me the address, I said. We will see you in 20 minutes, Sterling said. And Everly, bring the recordings. Bring everything. We are done playing nice. I hung up. My mother's texts were still coming in, buzzing against the leather seat. You are ungrateful. You are cruel. How can you do this to your sister? I picked up the phone, but I didn't open the messages. I went to the settings. I found the contact for Mom. I scrolled down to the bottom, and with a thumb that didn't shake, not even a little bit, I pressed block caller. Then I did the same for my father, and then for Monica. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Where to? Sloane asked. The bistro on 4th, I said. We have a meeting. Good, Sloane said, accelerating slightly as the traffic cleared. Let's go finish this. We drove north, away from the hotel, away from the lies, and toward a room where, for the first time in 9 years, the truth was going to be the only currency accepted at the table. The morning sun hit the glass facade of my office building with a blinding intensity. But inside, the air was cool, filtered, and quiet. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing a quarterly projection for a client, when the intercom buzzed. It was the receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, who usually handled everything with a cheerful efficiency. Today, her voice was tight. Everly, I am so sorry to disturb you, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. But there are 2 people in the lobby, a Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. They are causing a bit of a disturbance. They are demanding to see you. They said they are your parents and that they have a right to enter. I closed my laptop. I had expected this. Narcissists do not handle loss of control well. When they feel their grip slipping, they do not let go. They claw harder. They had likely driven up from Savannah the moment the sun rose, fueled by panic and the delusion that they could bully me back into submission if they just got me in a room alone. Do not let them up yet, I said calmly. Call Elias in Human Resources. Tell him I need him in Conference Room B immediately for a personal security matter. Then, once Elias is there, have security escort them up. Do not let them walk alone. Understood, Sarah said, sounding relieved. I stood up and smoothed the front of my skirt. I picked up the thick manila folder that had been sitting on my desk since I arrived at 7 in the morning. I had spent the night organizing it, printing copies, and ensuring that every piece of paper was in chronological order. I walked to the conference room, my heels clicking rhythmically on the polished concrete floor. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The fear that used to paralyze me when I heard my father's voice was gone, replaced by the cold, hard armor of a woman who knows she holds all the cards. Elias was already in the room when I arrived. He was our Director of Human Resources. a man with a demeanor like a calm sea and a mind like a steel trap. I had briefed him briefly on the situation, that my estranged family might attempt to contact me and that there were legal implications involving fraud. "They are coming up," I told him. "I need you to sit there and witness. You don't need to speak. Just listen. I want a record of everything said in this room." Elias nodded, placing a notebook on the table. "I am here. Everly, you are safe." The door swung open a moment later. A security guard held the door, his face impassive. My parents walked in. They looked terrible. My mother's makeup was hastily applied, failing to hide the dark circles under her eyes. Her hair, usually sprayed into a helmet of perfection, was slightly frayed. My father was wearing a suit that looked slept in, his tie loosened, his face flushed with a mixture of exhaustion and rage. They stopped when they saw Elias. They had expected to ambush me in my office, to corner the frightened daughter. Instead, they walked into a glass-walled boardroom with a witness and a security guard standing outside the door. "What is this?" my father demanded, gesturing at Elias. "We need to speak to our daughter, privately." "This is a place of business," I said, remaining standing at the head of the table. "Elias is here to ensure that our conversation remains professional. If you want to talk, you talk in front of him. If not, security will escort you out right now." My mother stepped forward, switching instantly into her aggrieved mother persona. Her voice dropped to a syrupy, trembling pitch. "Everly, please," she said, reaching out a hand as if to touch me. I took a step back, keeping the table between us. "We are family. We drove all night. We are worried about you. We are worried about us. What happened yesterday? It was a nightmare. You are destroying your sister's life." "No," I said. My voice was even, devoid of the emotional hooks she was trying to set. "I am not destroying anything. I am simply stopping you from destroying mine for a second time." "Destroying you?" my mother gasped, looking at Elias to see if her performance was landing. "We gave you life. We raised you. And this is how you repay us? By humiliating us in front of the Kleins? By making up stories about stolen money?" My father slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed in the room, but neither Elias nor I flinched. "Enough of the games," my father barked. "You are going to fix this. Everly, you are going to call Mason right now. You are going to tell him that you were mistaken. You are going to tell him that you were confused, that you have been under a lot of stress, and that you misunderstood the financial arrangements we made for your sister." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. "You are going to tell him that you withdrew that application yourself because you weren't ready for college. You are going to be a good daughter, and you are going to save this family's reputation. If you do that, we can forget this ever happened. We can move on." "And if I don't?" I asked. "If you don't," my father said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl, "then we will have no choice. We will tell everyone about your episodes. We will release the medical records, which we can manufacture if we need to, showing that you are delusional. We will tell your boss here that you are a liability. You will lose this job. You will lose that house. You will have nothing." It was the same threat they had used for years. "Obey us, or we will erase you." I looked at Elias. He was writing something down in his notebook, his face unreadable. I reached for the folder on the table. I opened it slowly. "You want to talk about records," I said. "Let's talk about records." I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a photocopy of an email, dated 9 years ago. "This is the confirmation email from the Briarwell portal," I said. "Sent to the email address Dad, Hayes Provider, net. It confirms the decline of the scholarship. It was opened 3 minutes after it was received. I was at work at the time. I have attached a copy of my time card from the grocery store for that day. I clocked in at 4 in the afternoon. The email was opened at 4:15. My father glanced at the paper, but didn't pick it up. "That proves nothing. You could have logged in from your phone." "I didn't have a smartphone," I reminded him. "You wouldn't buy me one. I had a flip phone with no data plan. You paid the bill. Remember? I have the billing statements right here." I slid another stack of papers across the table. But that is circumstantial, I continued. Let's look at the hard evidence. The money. I pulled out a document that Mr. Sterling had provided me with the night before. It was a copy of a bank transfer authorization. This is the document that authorized the Briarwell Trust to redirect the unused funds to the Hayes Education Trust, I said. It requires 2 signatures, one from the trustee and one from the original applicant waiving their right to the funds. I pointed to the signature at the bottom of the page. It was a scrawl that read, Everly Hayes. That looks like my name, I said. But it isn't my signature. You signed it, my father insisted, though sweat was starting to bead on his forehead. You signed a whole stack of papers before you left. You probably just forgot. I didn't forget, I said, because on the date this document was signed, May 5th, I wasn't in the house. I wasn't even in the city. I had already moved out. I was signing my lease agreement with Caleb Mercer at exactly the same time this document was supposedly signed in your study. I slid the lease agreement across the table. It was notarized. The notary stamp had a date and a time. You can't be in 2 places at once, I said. And unless you are suggesting I teleported back to the house I had just run away from to sign away $50,000. Then this signature is a forgery, and since you are the beneficiary of the forgery, that makes you the felon. My father picked up the paper. His hands were shaking. He crumbled it slightly, as if destroying the copy would destroy the truth. This is nonsense, he sputtered. You have no proof that we forced you out. We can still say you were unstable. We can say you signed it earlier and we just dated it later. It is your word against ours. And we are the parents. People believe parents. Do they? I asked. I reached into the folder and pulled out a small, black USB drive. I plugged it into the conference room's speaker system. You always told people you wanted me to be independent, I said. You told Mason you did it for my character. You told the world you were practicing tough love. I pressed a button on the control panel. The room filled with static, and then a voice cut through the air. It was my father's voice. 9 years younger, but unmistakable. Money is not the issue here. Character is the issue. If I write this check, I am robbing you of the struggle. Then my mother's voice, sharp and cruel. You are selfish. Everly, you think working at a grocery store makes you a martyr? It makes you an embarrassment. Then back to my father, shouting this time. If you want to learn, be independent. Don't rely on this family. We are done paying for your mistakes. I stopped the recording. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. My mother had her hands over her mouth. My father was staring at the speaker as if it were a bomb that had just detonated. That doesn't sound like a loving intervention, I said. That sounds like an eviction, and combined with the financial records showing you funneled that money to Monica, it sounds like a motive. My mother burst into tears. It wasn't the polite, victimized crying she had done at the wedding. This was ugly, jagged sobbing. She slumped in her chair, realizing that the narrative she had controlled for so long was completely shattered. We just wanted to help Monica, she wailed. She wasn't like you. She couldn't handle the pressure. She needed help. You were always so strong. Everly, you could survive anything. We knew you would be fine. But Monica, she needed it. So you stole it from me, I said. You punished me for being strong, and you rewarded her for being weak. We didn't think you would find out, my mother cried. It was just sitting there. The money was just sitting there. It wasn't sitting there, I said. It was waiting for me. My father stood up. He looked defeated, aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Everly, he said, his voice rasping. Please, if you file these charges, if Mason goes to the DA, I will go to prison. Your mother could be charged as an accomplice. Monica will lose everything. Is that what you want? To put your father in a cage? He looked at me with pleading eyes, playing his final card. Guilt. I am an old man, he said. We made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but we are your blood. Doesn't that mean anything? I looked at him. I looked at the man who had watched me pack my bags and walk out into the rain with nothing. I looked at the man who had forged my name to buy a luxury car for his favorite child while I ate expired food. "It means everything," I said. "It means I know exactly who you are." I turned to Elias. "Elias, I think we are done here. Please have security escort Mr. and Mrs. Hayes from the building, and make sure their photos are at the front desk. They are not to be allowed back in." "Understood," Elias said. Standing up, he looked at my father with professional disdain. "Sir, madam, this way." "Everly!" my mother screamed as Elias moved toward the door. "You can't do this! We are your family!" I didn't look back. I gathered my papers, sliding them back into the folder with precise, deliberate movements. "From this moment on," I said to the empty air in front of me, loud enough for them to hear as they were ushered out, "any communication you wish to have with me must go through the legal counsel of the Briarwell Foundation, or through my wife's attorney. I am not debating this. I am not negotiating. I am protecting the life I built." The door closed. The shouting was cut off. I stood alone in the conference room. My hands were flat on the table. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of lemon polish and recycled air. It wasn't the fresh air of the coast, or the smell of rain, but to me, it smelled like victory. It smelled like the one thing they had told me I would never truly have. It smelled like independence. The fallout from the conference room showdown was not immediate, but when it arrived, it came with the crushing inevitability of a mudslide. 48 hours after I walked out of my office, leaving my parents shouting at a closed door. The Briarwell Foundation concluded its preliminary internal investigation. They did not send a polite letter. They sent a courier with a heavy wax-sealed envelope to the legal counsel representing the Hayes family. With a copy delivered to me, the findings were clinical, precise, and devastating. The forensic analysis of the digital logs confirmed what Mason had suspected in the hotel hallway. The decline of award submission had not only originated from the IP address at 104 Maplewood Drive, but it had been authenticated using a device serialized to my father's personal home office computer. There was no ambiguity. There was no room for the hacker defense my father had tried to float in the lobby. The timestamp of the digital signature matched, to the second, a login session where my father had accessed his own banking portal. He had declined my future and paid his electric bill in the same browser window. But the Kleins were not just looking at the fraud. They were looking at the bride. Mason's family had their own investigators, men who moved quietly and dug deep. By Tuesday afternoon, the carefully curated image of Monica Hayes, the art student, the philanthropist, the perfect match for a Klein, had been dismantled. It turned out that her degree from State College was not in fine arts, as she had claimed, but a general studies certificate she had barely completed. Her charitable work consisted of attending galas paid for by the diverted funds. Her entire adult identity was a collage of exaggerations pasted over a foundation of stolen money. The meeting between Mason and Monica happened on a Wednesday evening. I was not there, but Mr. Sterling, who seemed to have appointed himself the narrator of my family's demise, recounted it to me later with a grim satisfaction. It took place in the library of the Klein estate. There were no flowers, no romance, and no parents. Just Mason, Monica, and 2 lawyers from the Briarwell Trust. Mason did not yell. According to Sterling, he looked like a man who had woken up from a long, feverish dream to find himself in a cold room. He placed a single file on the mahogany desk between them. "I don't care about the money anymore," Mason had said, his voice flat. "The lawyers will handle the money. I want to know about the intent." Monica had been crying. Of course, she was wearing a modest dress, trying to play the part of the confused innocent. But the presence of the lawyers made the act ring hollow. "I didn't know the technical details. Mason," she pleaded. "I just knew Daddy handled things. I didn't know it was her money." Mason looked at her. "Stop. Just stop. We have the lease agreements for your apartment. Monica, we have the emails where you asked your father if the transfer had cleared so you could buy the BMW. You knew the money was coming from a trust. You knew Everly didn't get her scholarship. You aren't stupid. So answer me this. Did you know they blocked her from going?" The room went silent. The lawyers stopped scratching their pens on their notepads. Monica looked at the man she was supposed to marry. She saw the exit sign glowing above the door. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that the charm which had worked on her parents would not work on a man who valued integrity. "They said it was better for the family," Monica whispered, her voice barely audible. "What?" Mason asked. "They said Everly was too independent," Monica admitted, wiping her nose. "They said if she got that money, she would leave us forever. They said she would think she was better than us. They said the money would be wasted on her because she didn't love us enough. And they said I needed it more because I was the one who stayed. Better for the family." That was the sentence that ended it. It wasn't a crime of necessity. It wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated decision to clip my wings so they could use the feathers to build a nest for their favorite child. Mason stood up. He didn't look angry. He looked nauseous. "The wedding is off," he said. "Not postponed. Cancelled. I cannot marry you. Monica, I cannot tie my life to someone who thinks love is a finite resource that you have to steal from your sister." He walked out of the library, leaving her with the lawyers and the wreckage of her own entitlement. The cancellation of the wedding of the season sent shockwaves through Savannah's social scene. My parents, desperate and cornered, tried to control the narrative one last time. They went on the offensive. My mother posted a long, rambling statement on social media, vague enough to avoid libel laws but specific enough to be understood. She talked about family betrayal, mental instability, and the tragic interference of a jealous sibling. She tried to paint me as the villain who had poisoned Mason's mind with lies. For about 6 hours, it looked like it might work. The rumor mill churned. People love a scandal, and a jealous sister is an easy trope to believe. Then, the Briarwell Foundation released their official statement. It was short, brutal, and devoid of emotion. It did not mention family drama. It simply stated that an internal audit had revealed significant irregularities and identity verification failures regarding the scholarship process 9 years prior, and that the foundation was cooperating with federal authorities to rectify a case of fraudulent misappropriation of charitable assets. That phrase, fraudulent misappropriation, killed the gossip instantly. You can spin a family fight. You cannot spin a federal investigation. The invitations to the country club stopped coming to the Hayes house. The neighbors stopped waving. The social insulation that my parents had spent 40 years building evaporated overnight. They were no longer the victims. They were suspects. But the final piece of the puzzle didn't come from the lawyers or the foundation. It came in a battered brown envelope, delivered to my front porch on a rainy Thursday morning. The return address was scrawled in shaky handwriting, Caleb Mercer. I took the package inside and sat at my kitchen table. Sloan was at work, so it was just me and the sound of the rain hitting the roof. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, and a handwritten note from Caleb. "Everly, I found this in a box of old papers I took from your dad's office years ago when I helped him move some furniture. I didn't think much of it then, just thought it was junk mail he tossed. But after hearing what happened, I went back and looked. I think you should have this. It belongs to you." I unfolded the yellowed paper. It was the original acceptance letter from the Briarwell Scholars Program, dated 9 years ago. "Dear Ms. Hayes, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected." I ran my fingers over the text. I had never seen this letter. I had waited by the mailbox for weeks, and it had never come. Then I noticed the envelope it had come in. Caleb had included that too. The seal was broken, but not neatly. It had been steamed open and then resealed with a glue stick that had yellowed over time. I stared at it. They hadn't just intercepted an email, they had physically intercepted my mail. My father, or my mother, had walked out to the mailbox, seen the crest of the university, seen my name, and opened it. They had held the proof of my success in their hands. They had read the words that validated my worth, and then they had hidden it. They had looked at my hope, and decided to bury it in a box. I expected to feel rage. I expected to want to scream, to drive to their house and throw the letter in their faces. But as I sat there, listening to the rain, I felt something else entirely. I felt light. For 9 years, a small, dark part of me had believed them. A part of me had believed that maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I hadn't really won. Maybe I was just a worker, destined to struggle. While my sister was the one born to shine, I had carried that doubt like a backpack full of stones, compensating for it by working twice as hard, earning twice as much, proving my worth over and over again. But looking at that letter, the backpack slipped off my shoulders. I was good enough. I had always been good enough. The struggle hadn't been a lesson. It had been a theft. And now, the theft was over. I picked up my phone. I didn't call my parents. I didn't check their social media. I opened my email and composed one final message to Mason and the Briarwell legal team. Subject: Case Resolution/Hayes. To the Board of Trustees. I have received the findings of your investigation. I have also received physical evidence confirming the interception of my acceptance 9 years ago. My lawyer asks me to sue for damages. He says I am entitled to the full amount of the scholarship plus emotional distress. But I am writing this to tell you that I am declining a civil suit for personal damages. I do not want the money. I never wanted their money. If you recover the funds from the Hayes estate, please put them back into the scholarship pool. Give them to a student who is working a night shift right now. Give them to someone who needs a way out. I do not need compensation for who I am. I only needed the truth about who they were. That is enough. Sincerely, Everly Hayes. I sent the email. That evening, when Sloane came home, she found me sitting on the back porch. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled like wet earth and pine needles. The sky was a bruised purple, fading into night. Sloane sat down beside me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She handed me a glass of wine and rested her head on my shoulder. "It is done," she said softly. "It is done." I agreed. "Your mother tried to call the office again," Sloane said. "Security turned her away at the gate. She was shouting that she loved you." "She loves the version of me that stays quiet," I said, taking a sip of the wine. "That version doesn't live here anymore." I looked out at the yard. It was my yard. I paid the mortgage. I planted the garden. I built the fence. For a long time, I thought independence meant doing everything alone. I thought it meant refusing help, hardening your heart, and expecting the worst from people. I thought it was a fortress you built to keep pain out. But as I sat there, with the warmth of my wife beside me and the silence of a scandal fading into the distance, I realized I had been wrong. Independence wasn't about being alone. It was about choice. It was the freedom to choose who gets to sit at your table. It was the power to look at the people who share your DNA and say, "You do not belong here," and then open the door for the people who do. My parents had tried to teach me a lesson about the value of $1. Instead, they taught me the value of the truth. It was a lesson that cost them everything. But it was the one thing they finally gave me for free. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, clean air of my own life. I was Everly Hayes. I was the first choice, and for the first time in 27 years, I was finally, truly, home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a long journey for Everly, and I am so glad you stuck with us to see her finally get the justice she deserved. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening on your way to work? Winding down at home? Or maybe taking a break in a coffee shop? Leave a comment down below and let me know your location and what you thought of Everly's decision at the end. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of karma and justice, please make sure to subscribe to Monica Revenge Stories. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who might need a reminder that the truth always comes out in the end. See you in the next story.